Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 4, verse 8. The line of arguments adopted by Arjuna in the opening chapter to justify his conduct in his friend's eyes is meaningless if Arjuna did not, in fact, believe that he was addressing a human being. It would, in such a case, suggest that Arjuna was an utter atheist who would not rely for his victory upon his divine companion. All the same, when Krishna comments upon Arjuna, characterizing him as a non-cavalier, a friend, and a devotee, deserving his assistance, Arjuna appeals to Krishna with a childlike simplicity. Do teach me, I am that disciple. This was undeniably an attitude of profound respect, but no indication that Arjuna treated Krishna as God Almighty himself. Why is the Lord giving this bit of his autobiography? Verse number 9. जन्म कर्म च मे दिव्यम् एवं यो वेत्ति तत्त्वतः त्यक्त्वा देहं पुनर्जन्म नैति मामेति सोऽर्जुन. He who thus knows in true light my divine birth and action, having abandoned the body, he is not born again, he comes to me, O Arjuna. After explaining the how and the why of incarnations in general, Krishna declares that those who, by constant contemplation upon this fact, understand the divine birth and activities of the Lord, and end their limitations and reach Godhood. That it is not a mere understanding or knowing that is indicated here is clear from the very words in true light, Tattvataha. That is, we have to experience subjectively how and when the Supreme Atman takes its avatar in us. Today, no doubt, individually we live as limited mortal brutes, but at certain moments when we are entertaining pure selfless desires, the very same spark of life in us comes to manifest a divine potency and a celestial dash. The stanza also subtly indicates that for one's spiritual development, the practice of upasana of the blissful form of the Lord is as efficient a method as meditation upon the formless self. There are some professional Vedantins who cannot accept the concept of the Lord having an embodiment. They are merely barking at a shadow. To one who is practicing sincerely and wholeheartedly, the goal is equally available, whether it is through the upasana of the truth with a form saguna or without any form nirguna. Krishna is indicating here the supreme state of perfection, the state of existence from where one is not born again. In the earlier Vedic literature, the state of Godhood is described as the state of deathlessness, Amaratva, while in the latter Vedic literature we find a slow change over and the eternal is explained as the state of from which one is not born again, Ajaha. The evolution of this concept clearly indicates the intellectual development of this country at that time. When a society is immature, its members are afraid of death But as they grow and evolve, it is not death that frightens them so much as the possibility of a new birth, for it starts a new lease of agonizing existence in imperfect environments. It is evident that the state of deathlessness is itself the state of birthlessness, because death can come only to that which is born, and yet the change in expression declares the maturity that was gained by the Vedic students of that period. This path of salvation is not one merely reasoned out by Krishna to suit his present purpose, but it was walked even in ancient times. Verse number 10. वीतरागभयक्रोधामन्मया मामुपाश्रिताः बहवो ज्ञानतपसा पूता मद्भावमागताः, freed from attachment, fear, and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, purified by the fire of knowledge. Many have attained my being. The entire path of self development and the final goal that is to be reached has been indicated in this stanza. Without renouncing attachment and its byproducts, which always disturb one's mental equipoise, no progress is ever possible for a seeker. Once this mental discipline is gained, absorbed in the idea of self perfection, the seeker comes to take total refuge in this great victory. Thereafter, the mission of self protection becomes a passion with him to thrill his life. When an individual has thus gained this stage of self development, he becomes fit for the study and practice of the great scriptures, the Upanishads. The study of the scriptures at the feet of a master, followed by independent analysis of Vedantic truths by oneself in an attempt to understand their real import, and lastly, the seeker's slow and steady attempt at balancing himself in single pointed meditation. All these three together constitute the technique of self development as visualized in Hinduism, a study of the theory of Vedanta, and all our attempts to live the life of tranquility and love indicated therein together constitute jnana tapas. There are some commentators who read into the stanza a synthesis of all the three paths. The path of action is indicated in the first half of the first line, because unless one trains oneself in the field of activity, detachment from desires, fears, and anger cannot be gained. The second half, absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, indicates the path of love, wherein the devotee binding himself with love to the God of his heart lives his life, taking refuge in nothing other than the Lord. The path of knowledge is indicated in the discriminative analysis and the constant and continued attempts at identification with the self, jnana yoga tapas. The import is that seekers walking all the seemingly different paths reach but the same goal, the Supreme Me. In fact, these three paths are but three different techniques to perfect our mind. All spiritual paths are but attempts to purify the mind and meaning to make it steady and single pointed. Some of us identify ourselves more with our bodies than with anything else. Others are by temperament living more in their mental zones and there are some again who live more in their rational personalities. To all these three types of seekers, if one and the same path is indicated, the chances are that the technique prescribed will not be universal in its acceptance and application. But whatever be the path pursued, and whatever be the type to which the seekers belong, the ultimate experience of spiritual perfection gained by every one of them at the moment of illumination is one and the same. This is an incontrovertible fact, for the mystical literature of the world reads as though every saint has borrowed and copied from all the earlier masters across the world. Then Lord Krishna must be cherishing feelings of affection and aversion since he liberates some and not at all. The answer follows. Verse number 11. ये यथा मां प्रपद्यन्ते तांस्तथैव भजाम्यहं मम वर्त्मानुवर्तन्ते मनुष्याः पार्थ सर्वशः. In whatever way men approach me, even so do I reward them. My path do men tread in all ways, O son of Pritha. Attachment and aversion are not the weaknesses of the Lord. He is a mass of dynamism, the source of all activities and achievements. We are given the equipment through which we can, as we like, invoke this infinite mind. If we rightly invoke and carefully use the equipments as a reward for our intelligent self application, we can reach the goal of our activities. If we misuse them, the very same divine force can be the cause of our utter disaster. The fuel strength in the petrol can be converted into horsepower through the mechanism under the bonnet. We can invoke the horsepower to reach our destination, or we can easily dump ourselves into a mass of twisted wreckage on the wayside and become a bundle of broken bones. These accidents are caused by the carelessness of the driver, although the strength and power with which the car dashes down the embankment of the road is no doubt supplied by the same petrol. But the strength in the petrol had no attachment for those whom it guided home safe, nor can we say that it had hatred for those whom it wrecked. With neither attachment nor hatred, the petrol gives its power when invoked through the mechanism of the engine, and how to make use of the power depends upon us and our wisdom in employing it. Similarly, here the Lord says, I, as life, lend my power to all without any partiality. In whatever form they invoke me, in that form I serve them. An electric plug in the house can be made use of to hear a song over the radio, to cool ourselves with the breeze of a fan, to boil water, to cook, or to warm the room with a heater. It all depends upon what instrument we plug into it. It is never possible that electricity flowing through the fan of its own accord can start emitting fire or light. Similarly, the unmanifest eternal force of life can be invoked and it shall fulfill all desires through us according to the type of our invocations. If God be thus free from all attachments and other evil passions. He, the Lord, must be gracious to all creatures alike and must be able to grant them all their desires. Then why is it that ordinarily men do not desire to seek the Lord and gain the infinite? Listen why it is so. Verse number 12. काङ्क्षन्तः कर्मणां सिद्धिं यजन्त इह देवताः क्षिप्रं हि मानुषे लोके सिद्धिर्भवति कर्मजा. They who long for satisfaction from actions in this world make sacrifices to the gods because satisfaction is quickly obtained from actions in the world of objects. If the atomic force guides us on both the path of good and on the path of evil, then how is it that in this world of ours we see but a rare few who are honestly trying to travel the path of righteousness, while the majority are pursuing the road of evil? This question must necessarily come to the mind of all intelligent students, and Lord Krishna is answering this possible query. He says, whether the mind wants to pursue an extrovert life or live the introvert choice, it can do so only by borrowing its capacity and capability from the omnipotency of the Atman. But the mind ever chooses an extrovert career in stinking sensuality because it is easy to gain cheap pleasures by satisfying the sensuous tickling of nerve tips. This is the cause for sensuality in the world, and Krishna explains why a majority of us, in spite of our best efforts, live a life of animal passions because success resulting from action is quickly attained in the human world. On this globe of ours, the quickest results are gained when our sense organs come in contact with their desired objects as the result of deliberate actions. Since a sensuous life is a life of least resistance, though of cheap pleasures, the ordinary man, in his keen appetite for joy and peace, wasted his spiritual strength in hunting after, procuring, and enjoying the fleeting sense objects. The truth of the statement is well within the experience of every one of us. The passage should not be understood only to say that worldly success is easily gained, but that as men we can intelligently plan our actions in such a way that we can, out of our actions, create or compel nature to yield a greater dose of happiness than the members of the vegetable and animal kingdom. Men who are seeking the lower or the higher ways of life through the employment of their spiritual strength can be divided upon the broad basis of their introvert and extrovert natures, and extrovert men can again be divided into four types on the basis of their finer distinctions of the textures of their thought and action. Verse number 13. चातुर्वर्ण्यं मया सृष्टं गुणकर्मविभागशः तस्य कर्तारमपि मां विद्यकर्तारमव्ययम्. The fourfold caste has been created by me. According to the differentiation of guna and karma, Though I am the author thereof, know me as non-doer and immutable. This is a stanza that has been much misused in recent times by the upholders of the social crime styled as the caste system in India. Varna, meaning different shades of texture or color, is employed here in the style, yogic sense. In the Yoga Shastra, they attribute some definite colors of the triple gunas, which mean, as we have said earlier, the mental temperaments. Thus, Sri Ram, Sattva is considered as white, Rajas as red, and Tamas as black. Man is essentially the thoughts that he entertains. From individual to individual, even when the thoughts are superficially the same, there are clear distinctions recognizable from their temperaments. On the basis of these temperamental distinctions, the entire mankind has been, for the purpose of spiritual body, classified into four castes of varnas, just as in a metropolis, on the basis of trade or professionals, we divide the people as doctors, advocates, professors, traders, politicians, tongawalas, etc. So too, on the basis of the different textures of thoughts entertained by the intelligent creatures, the four castes had been labeled in the past. From the standpoint of the state, a doctor and a Tongawala are as much important as an advocate and a mechanic. So too, for the perfectly healthy life of a society, all castes should not be competitive but cooperative units, each being complementary to the others, never competing among themselves. However, later on, in the power politics of the early Middle Ages in India, this communal feeling cropped up in its present ugliness and in the general ignorance among the ordinary people at that time. The chief pandits could parade their assumed knowledge by quoting in beats stanzas like this. The decadent Hindu Brahman found it very convenient to quote the first quarter of the stanza and repeat, I created the four Varnas, and give this tragic social vivisection a divine look having a godly sanction. They who did this were in fact the greatest blasphemers that Hinduism ever had to reckon with. For Vyasa, in the very same line of the couplet, as though in the very same breath, describes the basis on which this classification was made when he says, by the differentiation of the mental quality and physical action of the people. This complete definition of the Varnas not only removes our present misunderstanding but also provides us with some data to understand its true significance. Not by birth is man a Brahmin. By cultivating good intentions and noble thoughts alone can we ever aspire to Brahmanhood, nor can we pose as Brahman merely because of our external physical marks or bodily actions in the outer world. The definition insists that he alone is a Brahman whose thoughts are as much sattvic as his actions are. A Kshatriya is one who is rajasic in his thoughts and actions. A Shudra is not only one whose thoughts are tamasic, but also he who lives a life of low endures for satisfying his base animal passions and flesh appetites. The scientific attitude in which this definition has been declared is clear from the exhaustive implications of the statement. According to the differentiation of guna and karma, we had tried to explain how the self functioning through its own self forgetfulness, Maya, as it were, came to project forth temperamentally in three distinct conditions of mental and intellectual life: inactivity, activity, and inactivity. Through these triple channels flow the expressions of life, manifesting the different ideas, agitations, and actions of the embodied life. None of the vagaries of existence would have been possible if the equipments were not tickled by the touch of life. Krishna, as the very source of life, emphatically asserts here that he is the author of it all, in the sense that the ocean could say that it is the author of all the waves, ripples, foam, bubbles, etc. And gold can assert that it is the very creator and sustainer of all gold ornaments in the world, inasmuch as no gold ornament can exist when the gold element is removed from it. But at the same time, the infinite being all pervading, as we have already explained, cannot participate in any action, and therefore the Lord, in one and the same breath, declares that through he, though he is the author of it in his own real sense, he is at the same time a non doer. Such contradictions in Vedanta become confusing to the students as long as they are not initiated into the secrets of its study. In our conversation, we generally hear people say that they reached their destination 10 miles away by sitting in a bus. I caught a train and reached here. Since we understand their meaning in our usual routine conversation, we do not try to dissect such statements to discover the contradictions they contain. Sitting, you cannot travel. By catching the train, catching a train, can none can cover distances, and yet it is so true. When we travel in a bus or a train, we do not move. We only sit and hang on to our seats. But still, we cover the distance because the vehicle in which we sit moves on. In other words, the motion of the vehicle is attributed to us. Similarly, the creation of the temperaments, which should be attributed to the mind and intellect, is attributed to the Lord. In fact, the Lord, in his essential nature, being changeless and all pervading, is neither the doer nor the creator. Since I am not in reality the author of those actions of which you think me to be an author. Verse number 14. Namang karmani limpante name karma phale spruha इति मां योऽभिजानाति कर्मभिर्न स बध्यते. Actions do not tempt me, nor have I any desire for the fruits of actions. He who knows me thus is not bound by his actions. The ever pure and all full cannot be tainted, nor can it have any sense of imperfection which can germinate any desire. The Lord, the Self, declares here, actions do not tempt me, nor have I any anxiety for the fruits of actions. Tent or desire can come only to an ego, which is the self functioning through a given mind and intellect. When the subtle body is tainted by desires and agitations, then the ego in it seems to be played upon by these two. This is better understood by a following analogy. The sun, reflected in a bowl of water, is entirely on dependent upon the condition of the water. The reflected sun is shaken when the water in the bowl is disturbed, and it appears to be dim when the water is muddy. Neither the dimness nor the agitation of the reflection have caused any change at all in the original object, the sun, in the infinite heavens. Similarly, the ego suffers the evil tendencies and such other taints of the mind, and also gets disturbed due to the desires for the fruits of its actions. The self, in its pure conscious nature, is not at all affected by these delusory disturbances of its own reflection in the mental pool. This seems to be a novel interpretation of the usual Vedic technique of self perfection. Is there any precedent? Listen. एवं ज्ञात्वा कृतं कर्म पूर्वैरपि मुमुक्षुभिः कुरु कर्मैव तस्मात् त्वं पूर्वैः पूर्वतरं कृतम्. Verse number 15. Having known this, the ancient seekers after freedom also performed action. Therefore, you too perform action as did the ancients in the olden times. After knowing me that I am not non-agent and I have no longing for the results of actions, and realizing the all-full selfhood, then there shall no more be any desire or egoistic vanities. The technique of Karma Yoga, as enunciated and propounded in the last chapter, was practiced, says Krishna, even in olden times by many an intelligent seeker. In short, there is nothing new in the path of action, and all seekers trying to realize the self had been following the same technique. If Karma Yoga is to be performed, I can do it because of your advice. But why should you add that the ancient did the same? In reply to this, the Lord says, listen, there is great difficulty in understanding what constitutes right action. How? Verse number 16. किं कर्म किमकर्मेति कवयोऽप्यत्र मोहिताः तत्ते कर्म प्रवक्ष्यामि यज्ञात्वा मोक्षसे शुभात्. What is action? What is inaction? As to this, Even the wise are deluded. Therefore, I shall teach you action, the nature of action and inaction, knowing which you shall be liberated from the evil of samsara, the wheel of birth and death. All of us understand that action means movement of the limbs with relation to things in the outer world, and inaction means a state of existence without wherein there is a total cessation of such vigorous and conscious movements. This is the popular definition of action and inaction, which no doubt is quite acceptable as far as the everyday activities of life are concerned. But from the philosophical standpoint, the concept and features of both action and inaction change. For purposes of self development, when we consider action, it is not to be valued merely by observing its manifested qualities, but we must also take into consideration the unmanifested but subtly working motives behind the very same action. An action in itself cannot be considered either as good or bad. It is the motive behind it which determines the quality of the action. Just as the beauty of a fruit is not the last word for its edibility, but it depends upon its contents, so too a beautiful action in itself would be a poisonous act of criminality if the motive behind it is low and vicious. Therefore, it is said that in discriminating between what is action and what is not, even the poets, seers of old are confused. The word kavi nowadays mainly used for the poets, but was the name for the rishis, the seers, and representing a truth that was noble and immortal, was called a kavi. After stating this difficult problem of discriminating between action and inaction, Krishna promises here that we will teach Arjun what exactly constitutes right action, by knowing which naturally one can save one's self from all evil. It is familiar to all that action means movement and inaction means absence of it. To sit quiet, what is there to learn about them? Verse number 17. कर्मणो ह्यपि बोद्धव्यं च विकर्मणः अकर्मणश्च बोद्धव्यं गहना कर्मणो गतिः. For verily the true nature of right action should be known, also that of forbidden or unlawful action and of inaction imponderable is the nature path of action. Life means activity. Where activity has ended, death has entered. In active life alone, we can progress or deteriorate. A stagnant pool of water decays and soon gets putrefied, while the flowing water of a river ever keeps itself fresh, pure, and clean. Life being dynamic, it cannot, even for a moment, cease to function. Complete cessation from activities is impossible so long as life exists. Activity, therefore, is the very cornerstone of life, since man must always actively exist all his lifetime. The entire possibilities of activities have been taken into consideration by the great seers of old in evaluating life. The accompanying chart will vividly explain their classification. Life, activity, inactivity, then activity, karma and vikarma, then vikarma, actions to be done, actions to be avoided. Now actions to be both nitya, naimittik, kamya, occasions. Nitya means daily duties, naimittik means duties on special occasions, and kamya means desire prompted duties. Life is constituted of moments of activity and moments of inactivity. Through inactivity, neither progress nor deterioration is ever possible. Deep sleep or periods of complete cessation in existence are intervals of total holidaying from life, and they can neither make nor mar the individual's progress in his evolution. Periods of activity create man. This creative period depends upon what type of activity we venture upon. According to the ancient seers, activities can be of two types, constructive and destructive. Constructive activities which contribute towards the evolution of the individuals are termed here as karma. Destructive activities are those that are totally condemned by the Shastras because they tend to develop the individual, and those are termed as in our textbooks as vikarma. The constructive activities karma can be of three kinds: nitya, constant duties; naimittika, special duties on special occasions; and kamya, work purposeful and self determined for winning a desirable result or reward. Built upon the ancient Vedic doctrines, Krishna here expounds an elaborate theory of self development. He says that life is but a name for continuous activities. These activities can fall within two distinct classifications as karma and vikarma. Lord Krishna's advice to Arjuna is to avoid the forbidden actions vikarma and to pursue the constructive and creative activities of self-development karma. In this, in this scientific analysis, without any formality or mental reservation, Krishna totally rejects inactivity or karma. It is necessary. It is said here that a true seeker who is trying to live a diligent life, contributing to his material progress and to his spiritual self development, must necessarily know this triple classification of life considered as a bundle of activities. There are commentators who had considered akarma as the state of actionlessness, the selfhood. It was already said that the Lord is a non doer. This interpretation seems to be more acceptable in the light of how the akarma means term is employed in the Next verse 4:18, 4 chapter 18 verse. We consider akarma to mean inactivity, the state of sattvic peace and joy. Even after so beautifully defining the three clear and distinct classifications, Krishna admits that for an ordinary man it is not easy to distinguish the one from the other and to readily and successfully classify all his activities under these three headings, because Krishna says the nature of karma is imponderable. In this statement lies the secret suggestion that an action is to be evaluated not merely on its face value but after a sincere consideration of the motive working behind it. If the motive or desire or intention of one is pure and constructive, then the action too is noble and meritorious for that particular individual. Since in this evaluation of actions, the individual factor is so very predominant, one must agree with Krishna over the imponderability of the nature of karma. What is there to learn about action and inaction? The answer follows. Verse number 18. कर्मण्य कर्मयः पश्येद कर्मणि च कर्मयः स बुद्धिमान् मनुष्येषु स युक्तः कृष्ण कर्मकृत्. He who recognizes inaction in action and action in inaction is a wise among men. He is a yogi and a true performer of all actions. By thus following the rules of right living karma as indicated in Vedanta, when an individual has lived a sufficiently long period of time, the doubt arises as to when exactly we can say that he has completely reached the state of perfection. This question should necessarily throb in the intellect of all sincere students, and Krishna is trying to indicate this noble goal of fulfillment of all karmas in this stanza. Action, as we have already seen, is a gross expression in the outer world of some known or unknown deep desire in the intellect. A complete state of actionlessness would be necessarily the state of desirelessness or the state of infinite Godhead. But the goal indicated here is not this state of infinite perfection, but only a wayside station on the pilgrimage. A true and diligent man can discover and recognize in himself that even in physical inaction, there can be an intense mental and intellectual activity, and he can also recognize that he, even in the most intense activities himself, as an observer of it, is reveling in inactivity or karma. This is the maximum sattvic state. Such an individual has thereby reached a state of great equanimity, which is almost unavoidable in living a successful life of meditation. It is not said here that it is usually believed that right action itself will take us to the infinite. This is impossible. An action itself is a child of desire. Through action alone, we can create things, and created results are in their very nature finite. Thus, a Godhead reached through activity can only be a Sunday Godhead, which must depart from us the following Monday morning. Shankara and other great acharyas have all been tirelessly repeating that right action undertaken with a sense of devotion and dedication creates in the bosom of the student a sense of complete detachment as though he himself is a disinterested observer of all that is happening within and without him. When thus an individual detaches himself and observes his own activities as part and parcel of the world of activities around, he gains in himself an indescribable poise which is essential for the practice of meditation. Merely because an individual is keeping quiet, we cannot ever conclude that he is inactive. Physical inactivity is no criterion to call one an idler. On the other hand, it is a fact well known to all of us that when we are intensely thinking, whenever we are in a state of creative thinking, we are invariably quiet and inactive physically. Therefore, in the physical inactivity of one, which is labeled as idleness by the hectic footpath walkers in life, we can detect intense activity in his deep within. A Buddha under the fig tree, an artist at his easel, easel, a musician at his instrument, a writer at his desk. All of them punctuate their activities with still moments of intense inactivity called inactivity, and they bend forward to pour out their artistic and literary creations. All these physical moments of cessation are not mere inactivity, but they are the necessary quietude and silence when the mind and intellect function with the highest velocity. Thus, he who has a capacity to introspect can easily detect perfect action in complete inaction. As I am writing these words, the certain part in me can stand apart and visualize how my fingers, constituted of mere minerals, can hold the pen at the right slant and carry it along the paper so that the words may be spelt properly thereon. So, in all activities, this capacity to visualize discriminatingly our own activity, this capacity to observe ourselves functioning in a given field with or without the with or without the other members of the community is not very rare, and those who can do it can realize how, in spite of all activities, the observer in us, which observes the activities, is most inactive. The train runs, but not the steam. The fan moves, but not the electricity. The fuel burns, but not the fire. The body, mind, and intellect function and act, but not the self, the life in them. Such an individual who can thus stand constantly apart from himself and observe the activity inactivity and complete inactivity, even in the highest activity called inactivity, is termed here. We must carefully note not a man of realization, jnani, but an intelligent, full grown human creature, Buddhiman. He is the intelligent one among men, and he is certainly one who is ever very near to the self, Atma Buddhi, Atma Yukta. In short, desireless activities, when undertaken and performed in a spirit of dedication, purifies us and the intellect thereby gains a new keenness. Out of such a purified head, a new faculty, as it were, arises, the capacity to observe oneself as an actor on the stage of life is a capacity divine and noble inasmuch as it immediately redeems us from our selfish preoccupations with life's ever changing incidents and accidents. Realization of inaction in action and action in inaction is extolled as follows. Verse number 19. यस्य सर्वे समारम्भा कामसङ्कल्पवर्जिताः ज्ञानाग्निदग्धकर्माणं तमाहुः पण्डितं बुधाः. Whose undertakings are all devoid of desires and purposes, and whose actions have been burned by the fire of knowledge. Him the wise call a sage. He is called a saint, a man of perfection, whose undertakings are all devoid of plan and desire for result. Planning is a shackle upon the freedom of one's activities. In all planning, we are forcing the circumstances into a desired mold, a wished for pattern. In thus driving the situation to mold themselves into a planned pattern, we are exhausting ourselves and vainly fighting against terrible odds. This method of activity drains away all inspiration and joy from the worker. We have already discussed how the desire for results during any activity dissipates our energies. The fruits of an action can only mature in a future period of time, and therefore, to court the results is to escape from the present and live in the unborn periods of time. It is a law that the effects depend entirely upon the causes, and so to be sincere and complete in our activities is the greatest guarantee for all successful achievements. One who is a perfect sage, says Krishna, is one who will undertake to act without planning and without any desire for results. In this context, these two qualifications of a perfect act are to be understood with kindness and sympathy. A literal meaning of these two terms should not be used here, as in that case the statement would become absurd. The instruction to act, the instruction to act without planning and desire does not mean that a man of equilibrium in his inspired activity should not make use of his better intelligence and plan his activities to gain a result. It only means that while he is at work, he should not allow his abilities and capacities to run to waste with his mental preoccupations and sentimental fears regarding the results of his work. Vedanta does not in any way ignore man's intellect. The way of life, as advised in the Gita, provides only a more efficient means to act and achieve, to live and to enjoy, cultivating and applying our own potentialities more intelligently. An individual who has thus come to live intelligently and act diligently becomes fully wedded to the piece of work in hand and gets so entirely drunk with the joy of his own inspiration that the action cannot leave upon him even a trace of its reaction. Our mind and intellect will venture forth to worry over the unknown possibilities and dangers unless they can find a more secure hold upon something nobler and diviner. A perfect sage is one whose mind is ever hitched on to the cognition of the divine, so that even when he functions in the world outside, he is reveling in his own consciousness within. By thus painting the psychology of a sage at work, Lord Krishna is indicating with what mental attitude and intellectual composure Arjun, a seeker, should enter his fields of activity. These instructions given by Vyasa through the mouth of Krishna are meant for all generations of seekers, and therefore words addressed to Arjun are also words addressed to you and me and to me. When my son wants to become a doctor, I would certainly explain to him the story of the struggle of some known doctors so that my son may understand how best he himself can become a true doctor. So, to hear by the description of a perfect sage at work, Arjun is being initiated into the path of self development, which he is to follow faithfully if he is to reach the goal of life. Devoid of all desire prompted actions and attachments to their results, and therefore having no selfish end in view, when a sage performs kindly acts in the community, he really does no action. His action is equivalent to inaction, since all his actions are consumed in the fire of knowledge. To teach this inactivity, the Lord says, verse number 20, त्यक्त्वा कर्मफलासङ्गं नित्यतृप्तो निराश्रयः कर्मण्यभिप्रवृत्तोऽपि नैव किञ्चित् करोति सः. Having abandoned attachments to the fruits of action, ever contained, depending on nothing, he does not do anything though engaged in actions. We are not asked here to renounce the fruits of actions as such, nor to ignore them, but we are only warned to renounce our mental slavery and intellectual clinging to the expected fruits. Only when we get preoccupied with the expected fruits of our actions do we come to exhaust ourselves and thus become inefficient in our activities. Forsaking taktva, our clinging sangha, to the fruits of action karma phala, we are advised to strive for and to achieve the welfare of the society. A true painter never willingly sells his masterpiece. To him, that piece of canvas upon which he has lavished long periods of effort is now by itself a complete reward, even if he be starving, as compared to the satisfaction, the joy that it gives to the painter. He feels that even all the wealth in the world would be would but be too little a payment for it. If a mere finite piece of art could thus give to an ignorant man of agitations and desires such an invaluable joy, how much more intense must be the diviner joys of a perfect saint working in the world of names and forms. Indeed, the self realized ones, after their experience of the infinite reality as their own self, become perfectly independent of everything else. Again, the anxiety for the fruits of action, the sense of discontentment, and the feeling of dependency upon the things and beings on the world all belong to the misconceived notion of the ego center. The ego in us is the sufferer of all the above mentioned incapacities and inabilities. When the seeker after truth rediscovers his ego to be the infinite truth, the limited ego ends its career of sorrow, and naturally the agony and the incapacities of the imperfect ego also end. The reflection of the sun in a cup of water can be broken up when the water in the cup is shaken. But when the water is poured out, the reflection also ends, and no more can the sun in the sky be shaken by any known method. Such an individual who has rediscovered the self through seemingly engaged, though seemingly engaged in activity, does not do anything. The body, mind, and intellect act in the world of objects, but not the all pervading self, the life in us. Without life, the body cannot function, but when the body functions, life as such cannot be said to function. Therefore, one who is established in the self, though he engaged himself in action, cannot be said to do any action. The train may move, but it wouldn't be incorrect to say that the steam is moving. There is generally a doubt with the students that even if all the reactions of the past actions have ended at the time of self discovery, rediscovery, when such a prophetic master undertakes activity in the world, he would perhaps be initiating new actions of sins and merits for the enjoyment of which he may again have to take up births. This false idea has been completely eradicated in this stanza. After the God principle experience, when the saint functions in the world outside, though engaged in action, he does not do anything. Every action has a reaction. Naturally, even the bodily actions of a saint should have some reaction. This is the ordinary argument. To negate this assumption, the Lord says, verse number 21, निराशीर्यत चेत्तात्मा त्यक्तसर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्. Without hope, with the mind and self control, having abandoned all possessions, doing mere bodily action, he incurs no sin. Mere bodily activity is not action that will merit a reaction. It has already been seen that the reactions of actions take place in the mental and in the intellectual zones. An action can leave a mark on our subtle body only when we act with an egocentric consciousness that we are the action actors, and these marks can be effective only when our actions are motivated by powerful and strong egocentric desires. Ego is created only when the self, in its assumed delusion, identifies itself with the body, mind, and intellect and their respective fields of objects. This ego draws its sustenance from the hopes of the future and also from the satisfaction of the present possessions. Therefore, the stanza declares that an individual, when he has completely renounced hope, when he has brought his body and mind under perfect control, and when he has relinquished all possessions, can no longer sustain the illusory concept of the ego in him. When the ego has ended, the actions performed by that individual's body become incapable of leaving any permanent mark upon his mental constitution or on his intellectual character. Indeed, in sleep, if I become naked, I am not charged of any indecent behavior. If in my sleep my body kicks my own son, I am not accused of cruelty to my child. For in both the above cases we know that for the actions of my body I am not responsible, since I was absent in that body during those activities. This clearly shows that the egocentric identity with the body is the actor and the sufferer, and where the ego is not, there the mere bodily actions cannot bring about any consequences. A self realized saint's activities do not touch him at all, since he is not the actor. The actions only flow through him. Such a truly great one becomes not a doer of actions, but serves as a glorious instrument for the Lord's will to express itself. If the music coming from a violin is not good, the audience does not attack the violin, although the violinist cannot be very safe. The violin, of its own accord, does not make music, but it allows music to emanate from it at the touch of the flying bow and the tickling fingers of the performer. Its duties end when its supple chords have bent under the touch of the musician's dancing fingers. An egoless man of perfection is the wonder instrument through which the divine orchestra plays, singing the song of the Lord's own will. Faithfully, any activity undertaken by the perfect Master does not and cannot bring about any consequences, good or evil upon him. He is only a divine instrument. Though a self realized man renounces all actions he has of necessity to barely maintain his body, such a man steady on the path of knowledge is ever liberated to teach this, the Lord says. Verse number 22. यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टो द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समसिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वापि न निबध्यते. Content with what comes to him without effort, free from the pairs of opposites and envy, even-minded in success and failure. Though acting, he is not bound. Such an individual who has gone beyond his own ego can thereafter commence no desire prompted activity with any definite fruit and motive. Naturally, he will feel quite content and happy in whatever gain spontaneously rises out of his actions. The the state of egolessness indicates a condition of perfect conquest over the mind and intellect. Naturally, therefore, the pairs of opposites, heat and cold, success and failure, good and bad, joy and sorrow, etc., cannot affect him, they being always the interpretations of the world of objects by the mind. Where the mind has ended, the intellect too can no more bring its own affections and prejudices or its spirit of competitions and jealousies. We generally get agitated to the pools of success and failures. On the rising tide of success, our ego dances in a vain joy, while in the hollows of failures it feels miserable and crushed. But when the ego is completely divinized, the individual will thereafter automatically remain equanimous in both success and failure. Such an individual who has thus conquered his egocentric misconceptions about himself, though acting is not fettered by the natural consequences of the actions performed, karma phala. When such a perfect master of realization lives amidst us, he is generally seen to act in no way different from an ordinary sensible man, and yet, all the same, his activities show an extra dynamic capacity to carve out a more complete and enduring success. According to the Lord's words, the activities of a man of knowledge do not, in any sense of the term, affect him. Naturally, it becomes a little difficult for an ordinary man to know readily how this is accomplished by the sage. To explain the divine motive and attitude with which men of perfection act in the world, the following nine stanzas are declared by the Lord. Verse number 23. गतसङ्गस्य मुक्तस्य ज्ञानावस्थितचेतसः यज्ञायाचरतः कर्म समग्रं प्रविलीयते. of one who is devoid of attachment, who is liberated, whose mind is established in knowledge, who acts for the sake of sacrifice. All his actions are dissolved. A man of wisdom has been fully comprehended in the first line of this stanza. The qualifications are beautifully enumerated serially, and they themselves explain the path to perfection. Economy of words is the very essence of the style in all scriptural books. Even so, they are particularly careful to use the most suggestive terms for their purpose and take an artistic joy in ordering the very sequence of the words used. Here is a brilliant example of it. Devoid of attachment, Gata Sangaha. The divinity attained by the rishis is not a new status strangely acquired by them from some unknown and secret quarters. It is only a rediscovery of the perfection that is already in each one. The we are self exiled from ourselves due to our attachments and the finite world of objects. Thus, a wise man is he from whom all his attachments with the finite things of the world have dropped away. Liberated, Muktaha, the majority of seekers have only a vague idea of what this liberation means. The bondages are created upon our personality and life by none other than ourselves. These bondages, infinite in their number, are produced by the subtle cords of our own attachments and things. The deluded ego feels fulfilled only through the world of objects. Thus, as a body, it gets attached to the world of its sense objects. As a mind, it lives enslaved to the world of emotions, and as an intellect, it gets bound with its own ideas. With mind centered in knowledge, jnanavasthita the above phenomenon of perfect detachment, which produces a sense of complete liberation, can be accomplished only when the mind of the seeker gets centered in the right discriminative knowledge and development for itself, a capacity to distinguish between develops for itself a capacity to distinguish between the permanent and the impermanent, the fleeting and the lasting. A perfect sage who has thus cut himself free from all attachments, with his mind well balanced under the light of his own wisdom, becomes completely liberated from the chains of all moral debilities, ethical imperfections, and sensuous appetites. Such a sage too performs work for the rest of his life in his perfected manifestations. Krishna says that all such activities undertaken and performed by him are ever done in a spirit of dedicated activities, yajna. When a sage thus functions in a spirit of yajna, that action itself does not and cannot produce any reaction or forging of thicker bondages with newly formed vasanas. The term yajna, borrowed from our scriptures, is employed here by Krishna to yield a more elaborate sense, implying a wider and a more universal application. In the Gita, the Vedic yajna has become a self dedicated activity performed in a spirit of service to the many. All actions performed without ego and not motivated by one's egocentric desires fall under the category of yajna. All an action undertaken in a spirit of divine dedication is called a yajna sacrifice. All through the next six stanzas, we get an enumeration of something like 12 different yajnas which can be practiced by everybody on all occasions, in every field, under all conditions. When a sage of the description given in the stanza performs actions in a spirit of yajna, they dissolve away without leaving any impression upon his mind, just as the rainbow that disappears when the thin shower falling against the sunlight ends. If this be so, the question arises, for what reason then do all actions which he performs entirely dissolve without producing their natural results? Listen why it is so. Verse number 24. Brahmarpanam brahmave brahmagno brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. Brahman is the oblation. Brahman is the clarified butter, etc. Constituting the offering by Brahman is the oblation poured into the fire of Brahman. Brahman verily shall be reached by him. Who always sees Brahman in all actions. This is a famous stanza which is chanted throughout India as a prayer at the table before the Hindus eat their meals. Although today 90% of those who chant this stanza before their meals do not understand or care to follow its meaning. All the same, it contains infinite suggestions and almost summarizes the entire philosophic content of Vedanta. The infinite reality, which is the changeless substratum behind and beneath the changing panorama of the world, is indicated by the Vedic term Brahman. And this is contrasted with that aspect of truth which functions in and through the body as the Atman. But though the eternal truth has been thus indicated by two different terms, Vedanta holds that the Atman is Brahman. The metaphor is borrowed from the very well known divine ritualism of the Vedas, the yajnas. In every yajna, there are four essential factors: the deity invoked to whom the oblations are offered, the fire in which the offerings are poured, the material things that constitute the offerings, and the individual who is performing the yajna. Here, the stanza explains the mental attitude of the experience of the perfect sage when he performs the yajna. To him, truth alone exists and not the delusory plurality which his erstwhile ignorance had conjured up for him in his mind. Therefore, to him all yajnas arise from Brahman. 3:14-15, in which Brahman, the truth, is the performer, offering Brahman, the material, to the sacred fire, which is also nothing other than Brahman, invoking but Brahman. When one wave jumps over another, when one wave jumps over another and breaks itself to embrace and become one with its comrade, we who know that all waves are nothing but the ocean can certainly understand that in this act of union between two waves, nothing has happened except that the ocean rising over the ocean broke itself to become one with the ocean. If an individual can thus see the substratum or the essential nature in and through all names and forms, actions and behaviors, to him, irrespective of all conditions and circumstances, all beings and things are but a remembrance of the infinite blissful truth. If actions are performed by a saint, invoking no deity other than Brahman, all his actions dissolve away because he is invoking but the one truth through all his actions. The significance of the stanza as a prayer to be said before food is amply self evident. To live, we must eat. Food is necessary for existence. Whatever be the type of food, when one is hungry, one will enjoy one's meals. The suggestion is that even at this moment of natural enjoyment, we are not to forget the great truth that it is Brahman eating Brahman, and that during our meals we are offering to Brahman the food that is Brahman, invoking nothing but the grace of Brahman. To keep this idea constantly in the mind is to get perfectly detached from the enjoyment and raise ourselves to a greater and endless beatitude, which is the reward of supermanhood. After representing the very spirit in all yajnas, the Lord is trying to show Arjun how all through life, all our actions can be converted to become a yajna, right knowledge, bhavana, self in the fire of Brahman, Brahma Yajna. In the following few stanzas, Lord Krishna is explaining the mental attitude of a saint at work. No doubt, like a Raman Maharshi, and at certain moments he may not undertake any activity at all, but merely continue living among the world of objects. Now the doubt is what would be the mental attitude of such a perfect master when he comes in contact with the world and functions in it. A yogi is one who is always trying through all the means that are in him to raise himself from his state of physical, mental, and intellectual imperfections to a more perfect state of existence. In this sense of the term, it would be unjust to read into the stanza merely the obvious meaning. The word deva comes from a root meaning illumination. Subjectively viewed, the greatest devas are the five sense organs: eyes illumining forms and colors, ears illumining sounds, the nose illumining smells and the tongue, and the skin illumining tastes and touches. Seekers and perfected masters yogins too, when they move in the world, no doubt perceive sense objects through sense stimuli, but in their understanding and experience, perception is but a world of sense objects continuously offering themselves into the fire of this perception in order to invoke the devas sense perceptions. Such seekers and masters walk out into life, and when they come across the sense world, they only recognize and experience that the world of objects is playing is paying a devoted tribute to the powers of sense perceptions. When this mental attitude is entertained constantly by a seeker, he comes to feel completely detached from the sense experiences, and irrespective of the quality of experience, he is able to maintain a constant sense of inward equanimity. As contrasted with this method, Devayajna, there are others who perform Brahmayajna, says Krishna, wherein they come to offer the self as a sacrifice by the self in the fire of the self. This statement becomes perfectly clear when subjectively analyzed and understood. As long as we exist in the body manifestation, we have to come across the world of sense objects. The outer world can yield to us its joy and sorrow, not by itself, but only as a result of our healthy and unhealthy attitude towards it. The objects in themselves are important to give us either joy or sorrow. The perfect masters understand that the sense organs are only instruments of perception and that they can work only when in contact with the Supreme, the Atman. All masters live in this true understanding, allowing the sense organs to sacrifice themselves in the knowledge of Brahman. By its statement, seekers are also advised as to how they too can gain a certain amount of freedom from their senses by dedicating their sense life in the service of the world. When an individual's sense organs of perfection and action are to function and act not for his own egocentric selfish satisfactions but for the sake of serving the society or the world, then even if such an individual lives in the world of objects, he will not be enslaved by his attachments to his possessions. After thus enumerating the Deva Yajna and the Brahma Yajna, Lord Krishna expounds two more methods in the following. 26 verse number श्रोत्रादीनीन्द्रियाण्यन्ये संयमाग्निषु जुह्वति शब्दादीर्विषयान्यन्ये इन्द्रियाग्निषु जुह्वति. Some again offer hearing the other and other senses as sacrifice in the fires of restraint. Others offer sound and other objects of sense as sacrifice in the fires of the senses. Some other great masters offer hearing and other senses in the fires of restraint. The in all these yajnas described, the metaphor is taken from the most familiar ritualism known at the time to Arjun. Oblations were offered in Vedic ritualism into the sacred fire in order to invoke the blessings of the deity. In these examples, we are shown how, when some materials are offered into a sacred fire, not only the obstacles, not only the oblations get burnt up and consumed by the fire, but also as a result, a great blessings accrues. Here it is said that some masters live on in the life, constantly offering these senses into the fire of self control, so that the senses of their own accord get burned up, contributing a greater freedom and joy in the inner life of the man. It is also a fact very well experienced by all of us that the more we try to satisfy the sense organs, the more righteous, righteous they become and loot away our inner joy. By self control alone can the sense organs be fully controlled and mastered. This is yet another method shown to the seekers by which they can come to experience and live a more intense life of deeper meditation. It is this method the path of sense control is indicated. In the second line, the path of mind control is suggested. The mind is sustained and fed by the stimuli that reach it from the outer world. The sense objects perceived by the organs create and maintain the mind. The mind can never function in a field which cannot be interpreted in terms of the five types of sense objects. Therefore, to make the mind non receptive to the perceptions of the indriyas is a method by which one can gain a better poise in life for purposes of meditation. Such an individual who has controlled the mind completely and has withdrawn it totally from the sense centers is indicated here when the Lord says, others offer sound and other objects in the fires of the senses. If the former method is a technique of controlling the stimuli at the very gateway of the senses, the latter is a different technique of controlling the same from the inner and therefore more subtle level of perception called the mind. After thus explaining these four methods, yet another technique has been propounded by the Lord in the following stanza. Verse number 27. Sarvani Indriyakarmani Pranakarmani Chapade Atmasayama Yogagno Juhati Jnanadipite. After others again sacrifice all the functions of the senses and the functions of the breath, vital energy in the fire of the yoga, the self-restraint kindled by knowledge. All the activities of the sense organs, jnanendriya, and the organs of action, pranendriya, are offered into the knowledge kindled fire of right understanding Control of the ego by the better understanding of the divine reality is called here as the yoga of self restraint, Atma Sanyama Yoga. The path of discrimination, vichara, lies through a constant attempt at distinguishing between the limited lot of the ego and the divine destinies of the spirit. Having discriminated thus, to live more and more as the self and not as the ego, is to restrain the self by the self, Atma Sanyama. By this process, it is evident how the mad ramblings of the organs of perceptions and actions can be completely restrained and entirely conquered. Exhausting the above mentioned five different techniques as though to bring to the understanding of Arjun that 100 other methods can be indicated. Krishna enumerated in haste five more different methods in the following stanza. Number 28. Dravya yajnastapo yajna yoga yajnastatha pare स्वाध्याय ज्ञान यज्ञाश्च यतयः संशितौ व्रताः. Controlling of the sense organs of both perceptions and knowledge is not possible until the seeker's mind is turned fully upon the contemplation of the self. Hence, this is called as the restraint of the self, individual personality by the self. Others again offer wealth, austerity, and yoga as sacrifice, while the ascetics of self restraint and rigid vows offer study of scriptures and knowledge as sacrifice. Dravya Yajna, offering of wealth. Sacrifice of wealth is to be understood in its largest connotation. Charity and distribution of honestly acquired wealth in a sincere spirit of devotion to and in the service of the community or of the individual who is the recipient of the benevolence is called Dravya Yajna. This includes more than a mere offering of money or food. The term dravya includes everything that we possess, not only in the world outside but also in our worlds of emotions and ideas, to pursue thus a life of charity, serving the world as best as we can, with all that we possess physically, mentally, and intellectually. Is the noble sacrifice called wealth sacrifice. In order to perform this, it is not at all necessary that the devotee should be materially rich, even if we are poor and physically debilitated. From our bed of pain and penury, we can still be charitable because our inner treasures of love, kindness, sympathy, and affection do not at all depend either upon our material circumstances nor on our physical condition. Sometimes a word of sincere sympathy, a look of love, a smile of true affection, or a word registering true friendship can give to the receiver more than a heartless check, even if it be for a very fat sum. Tapoyajna, some leave offering into their Lord a life of austerity. There is no religion in the world which does not prescribe by some method or the other periods of austere living. These austerities, vratas, are invariably undertaken in the name of the Lord, in which very well known it is very well known that the Lord of compassion, who feeds and sustains even the lowest of the law, can gain no special joy because of a devotee's self denial, but it is generally done in a spirit of dedication so that the seeker might achieve some self control. This activity, in some extreme cases very painful indeed, is undertaken in order that the devotee may learn to control himself in his sense life. Yoga Yajna, an earnest attempt of the lesser in us to grow into a better standard of diviner living, is called yoga. In this attempt, devoted worship of the Lord of the heart, called upasana, is the primary method. This worship and love offered to the Lord of the heart, when performed without any desire or motive, is also called yoga, since it directly hastens the seeker's self development. Swadhyaya Yajna. The daily deep study of the scriptures is called Swadhyaya. Without a complete study of the scriptures, we will not be in a position to know the logic of what we are doing in the name of spiritual practice, and without this knowledge, our practices cannot gain the edge of the depth that are essential for sure progress. Thus, in all religions, the daily study of the scriptures is insisted upon as an essential training during the seeker's early days. Even after self-realization, we find that the sages spend all their spare time reading and contemplating upon the inexhaustible wealth of details and suggestions in the scriptures. In its subjective implications, Swadhyaya means self study, including the art of introspection pursued for understanding our own inner weaknesses. If, in the case of a seeker, it is a technique of estimating his own spiritual progress, in the case of a seer, it will be for revealing in his own self. Jnana Yajna, the sacrifice of knowledge. This word has very often been used in the Gita, and it constitutes one of the many original terms coined out by Vyasa to beautify the Lord's declarations. The sacrifice of knowledge is the term given to that activity in man by which he renounces all his ignorance into the fire of knowledge kindled by him and in him. This is constituted of two aspects: negation of the false and assertion of the real nature of the self. These two activities are effectively undertaken during the seeker's meditation. All these five methods of self development, sacrifice of wealth, austerity, yoga, study, and knowledge, can be practiced with profit only by those who are men of rigid determination and who can find in themselves an inexhaustible enthusiasm to apply themselves consistently to reach this great goal. It is not sufficient that we know these paths or that we decide to gain these developments. Progress in spirituality can come only to one who is sincere and consistent in his practices. Yatayah. In the following verse, Krishna explains pranayam as yet another method, the 11th in the series. Verse number 29. अपाने जुहति प्राणं प्राणे पानं तथा परे प्राणापानगतिरुद्ध्वा प्राणायामपरायणाः. Others offer as sacrifice the outgoing breath in the incoming and the incoming in the outgoing, restraining the courses of the outgoing and incoming breaths, solely observed in the restraint of breath. In this verse, we have a description of the technique of breath control regulated, practiced by some seekers in order to keep themselves under perfect self control when they move amidst the sense objects in the workaday world. As a sacrifice, some offer the outgoing breath into the incoming breath, and others offer the incoming into the outgoing. The latter is in the technique of pranayam called the puraka, meaning the process of filling in, while the former is the presence process of blowing out, technically called the rechaka. These two processes are alternated with an interval wherein the breath is held for some time within and without, which is called the kumbhaka. This process of puraka, kumbhaka, rechaka, kumbhaka, when practiced in a prescribed ratio, becomes the technique of breath control pranayama. This technique is again explained here as a yajna by which the practitioner in the long run learns to offer all the subsidiary pranas into the main prana. Prana is not the breath. This is a general misunderstanding. Though through breath control we come to gain a perfect mastery over the activities of the pranas in us. When very closely observed, we find that the term prana used in the Hindu scriptures indicates the various manifested activities of life in a living body. They generally enumerate 5 different kinds of pranas, which, when understood correctly, are found to be nothing but the 5 different physiological functions in every living body. They are the function of perception, the function of excretion, the function of digestion and assimilation, the circulatory system, the which distributes the food to all parts of the body, and lastly, the capacity in a living creature to improve himself in his mental outlook and intellectual life. These activities of life within, about which an ordinary man is quite unconscious, are brought under the perfect control of the individual through the process of pranayam, so that a seeker can by this path come to gain a complete capacity to withdraw all his perceptions. This is indeed a great help to a meditator. In this series of techniques enumerated in by Krishna as a last method, we have in the following stanza the 12th factor and method detailed. Verse number 30. अपरे नियताहारा प्राणान् प्राणेषु जुह्वति सर्वेऽप्येते यज्ञविदो यज्ञक्षपितकल्मषाः. Others with well regulated diet offer vital airs in the vital air. All these are known of sacrifice, are knowers of sacrifice, whose sins are destroyed by sacrifice. There are some who, through systematic regulation of their diet, come to gain a complete mastery over themselves and their appetites and passions. Dieting is not at all a new technique in India. The ancient rishis not only knew the vitamin contents and the calorie values of the various food materials but also prescribed very scientific combinations of the available vegetables and cereals to suit the temperament, function, and duties of persons belonging to different levels of society. Not only this, they so well perfected their knowledge that they even showed how, through regulated dieting, a man's character and behavior, and ultimately his very cultural quality, can be purified and raised. The verse adds that all these knowers of yajna, meaning all those who know the art of living these techniques, when they practice them in a spirit of self dedication and selfless enthusiasm, can fully come to profit by them. These methods and techniques do not promise that they will of themselves guide us or lead us to the Supreme. It is promised that all those who practice all or a few or even one of them for a sufficiently long period can become purified of other sins. Sin, we have already discussed, is but a wrong pattern of thought channels that is etched in a mind by devolutionary thoughts entertained by a deluded ego in its extreme misunderstanding and its consequent attachment with the body and sense objects. It is these sinful vasanas that make the ego act like an animal and force it to commit low and vicious criminalities. The above mentioned practices not only wipe clean the existing wrong vasanas but cut out in their place a new channels of thoughts more constructive and evolutionary in their very nature. Thus, it must be carefully noted that all practices, physical, mental, and or intellectual, that are generally known as divine and religious, are without exception only techniques by which the mind and intellect equipment gets adjusted for greater and more effective self application in meditation. Meditation is the path in which the ego learns to withdraw its false evaluations of itself in particular and of life in general and comes to the final experience of its own divine nature. We often find sincere seekers getting so extremely attached to their own path of practice that they constantly argue about it among themselves. Therefore, Arjun has been instructed here that all paths, however noble and great they may be, are all but means and not an end in themselves. In all the above enumerated 12 different yajna techniques, self effort is a common factor, and therefore the Lord says, verse number 31, Yajna Sheshtamrita Bhujo Yanti Brahma Sanatanam Nayam Lokostya Yajnasya Kutonyak Purusattamam. The eaters of the nectar, remnant of the sacrifice, go to the eternal Brahman. Even this world is not for the non performer of sacrifice. How then the other world, O best of the Kurus? Eating the sacred remnant of the yajna. In the ancient ritualism of fire sacrifices, things that were left over in the pot from which the offerings were made were called the sacred remains, and they were considered by the devotees as divinely potent remnants from the Lord's own plates. This was generally eaten by the devotees with great reverence, and it was considered that thereby their minds would get purified. In the metaphor used here, when we try to find its corresponding implication in the subjective world, we must understand the remnant that is left over to mean the result of the above mentioned 12 types of yajnas. The result of the above mentioned 12 types of yajna, the result of any one of the above yajnas is, as we know, a greater amount of self control and a consequent inner integration of the individual personality. Those who have gained this have prepared themselves for the greatest vocation in life called intense meditation. Such an integrated man can gain a greater inner poise in his meditation, through which he can easily come to experience the finite and the eternal, indicated by the term Brahman. The second line of the verse contains a beautiful generalization which clinches the main idea that self development and inner growth cannot be had without investing continuous and sincere self effort. Inaction can never bring about any profit, even in this world, in any field whatsoever, without self dedicated and selfless activity. No great and enduring profit can be achieved in this world, and therefore Krishna exclaims, how could a seeker hope to achieve the highest without any conscious effort at gaining it? Two doubts can arise in the minds of ruthlessly intelligent students. It may be doubted, can all these different paths lead us to one and the same goal? Or do they lead to different goals? It may also be doubted, are these not mere intellectual theories propounded by Krishna himself as an original contribution to Hindu thought? The following explains these two doubts. Verse number 32. एवं बहुविधा यज्ञा वितता ब्रह्मणो मुखे कर्मजान् विदितान् सर्वान् एवं ज्ञात्वा विमोक्षसे. Thus innumerable sacrifices lie spread out before Brahman, literally at the mouth of or face of Brahman. Know them all as born of action, and thus knowing you shall be liberated. In the world, no two different activities produce the same set of results. The 12 different yajnas described so far are all conspicuously different from one another, and so they must all be producing not an identical result but a series of different effects. In order to show that though the paths are different, all of them ultimately lead to the same goal. It is said here, various yajnas lie open leading to the gate of Brahman, the eternal. Just as all roads lead to Rome, all the above mentioned techniques of yajna also ultimately lead to one and the same goal. Know them all to be born of action. This timely reminder of the Lord has more than one direct suggestion. These paths prescribed in the Vedas are all to be pursued through self effort, and therefore Arjun is reminded of the inevitability of right action if he wants to move ahead in his cultural self development. And it also suggests that all these paths are only the means and not the end. Action is born of desires, and therefore, as long as there is action, there is no redemption from desires. The state of desirelessness is the state of perfection, and therefore, in the context of our understanding, these pregnant words of the verse ring a note of warning that we should not misunderstand these yajnas as the very goal of life. Understanding thus, you shall be free. Here, the word understanding is not a mere intellectual apprehension but a complete spiritual comprehension in a vivid subjective experience of reality. Right knowledge was represented as a knowledge sacrifice 424. Then several sacrifices have been mentioned. Knowledge is now being extolled as compared with these latter kinds of sacrifices, which are all means of attaining the Purushartha, the inner integration. Verse number 33. श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात्सनुष्ठितान् स्वधर्मे निधनं श्रेयः श्रेयान् द्रव्यमयात् यज्ञात् ज्ञानयज्ञः परन्तप सर्वं कर्माखिलं पार्थ ज्ञाने परिसमाप्यते. Superior is knowledge sacrifice to sacrifice with objects, O Parantapa. All actions in their entirety, O Partha, culminate in knowledge. Krishna compares the Dravyajna, the sacrifice of material oblations, with Jnana and declares that for cultural self development, Jnana is any day nobler and diviner than mere formalistic ritualism with material offerings, Dravyajna. In the second line of the verse, the Lord explains how and why he considers the sacrifice of ignorance in knowledge, Jnana, as greater and nobler than the sacrifice of food and other materials in the sacred fire, Dravyajna. Ritualistic karmas produce results to enjoy which the individual ego has to take up new manifestations wherein again he has yet to undertake and perform more and more activities. Karma never ends karma, and therefore action cannot be a complete fulfillment in itself. On the other hand, right knowledge, jnana, ends all karmas once and for all, inasmuch as the deluded ego destroys itself in the light of self knowledge. We have already seen that ignorance causes the desires, and desires are the seeds from which all actions arise. When this ignorance, the primary source of all activities, ends at the dawn of knowledge, all actions naturally get fulfilled. Therefore, all action in its entirety, O Partha, attains its consummation in knowledge. If thus by knowledge alone we can really gain the fullest satisfaction, then how are we to gain this knowledge by which all actions can at once be burnt up and exhausted? Verse number 34. तद्विद्धि प्रणिपातेन परिप्रश्नेन सेवया उपदेक्षन्ति ते ज्ञानं ज्ञानिनस्तत्त्वदर्शिनः. Know that by long prostration, by question, by service, the wise who have realized the truth will instruct you in that knowledge. The verse explains the qualities that are necessary in a teacher who alone can instruct us on the path of knowledge and guide us to the great consummation in all life. It also explains the mental attitude and the intellectual approach which a successful student must adopt so that his contact with the Guru may be fruitful. Prostrating yourself, all that is meant here is that the student must have an intellectual attitude of surrender and meekness, respect and obedience. When he approaches the teacher who has to instruct him upon the secret of life, regarding the world within and the methods of its control, ordinarily the students are completely ignorant and therefore they must approach the teacher with a readiness to understand, grasp, and follow his instructions. Just as water flows always from a higher to a lower level, so too knowledge can flow only to a lower level. It is therefore necessary that the student must have a spirit of prostration in him, so that he may be able to get himself surcharged with the knowledge that flows from the teacher. Thus, the prostration as used here essentially defines more the required mental and intellectual attitude of the student than his physical readiness to fall flat on the ground at the feet of the master. By questions, by raising doubts to the teacher, we are opening up the cistern of knowledge locked up in the master's bosom. A perfect guru immediately detects from the questions the false line of thinking in the student, and while removing the very doubt, he imperceptibly orders and reorganizes the right way of thinking in the inner thought life of the student. When this intellectual wrestling between has been practiced for a long time, the fragrance of perfection in the teacher, as it were, gets transferred to the student's life. Therefore, it has been an immortal tradition among the Hindus to have open discussions between the teacher and the taught called satsang. This privilege is not available in all religions of the world. In fact, Vedanta alone thus dares to proclaim a perfect freedom for the intellect. It never treads upon the blind faith of the seekers. In all other religions, faith is a great power and force, and therefore many of the intellectual imperfections in their scriptures cannot be completely answered, and the priests therein must necessarily check the full freedom of the seekers to question their sacred texts. By service, the offering of flowers and sweetmeats is not what constitutes seva. These have been understood as the service of the teacher only as a byproduct of institutionalism and ashram organization. A true service of the teacher lies in the attempt of the student to attune himself to the principle of life advocated and advised to him by the master. To live the life indicated by the rishis is the greatest seva that an imperfect mortal can offer to the man of perfection. The two main qualifications essential for a fully useful teacher on the spiritual path are a perfect knowledge of scriptural literature and a complete subjective experience of the infinite reality. These two factors are indicated here. Each without the other is totally useless in guiding a seeker. Mere knowledge of the scriptures can make only a learned pandit and not a perfect master. A man of intimate experience of truth will, in himself, become completely silent because he will find it impossible to explain and express his own transcendental experience to other seekers. By this, the Lord means to say that knowledge alone which is imparted by those who have realized the truth, that knowledge alone and no other knowledge can prove effective. Then, then the following statement holds good. Verse number 35. यज्ञात्वान् न पुनर्मोहमेवं यस्यसि पाण्डव येन भूतान्यशेषेण द्रक्ष्यस्यात्मन्यथो मयि. Knowing that you shall not, O Pandav, again get deluded like this, and by that you shall see all beings in yourself and also in me. After all these painful troubles, it may chance that we may get knowledge, but after one's death, one may again fall back to ignorance and come to repeat the same process. Even in our own lifetime, there have been many things learnt and experienced which we do not now remember. Similarly, this knowledge also may be lost to us, in which case it will be indeed a great loss. This doubt is fully cleared out by an assertive, confident declaration that after regaining this knowledge, you shall not, O Partha, again get deluded here like this. This declaration, rather fanatical in style, has to be for the time being accepted by all seekers. All teachers unanimously declare this idea, and since they have no particular reason to deceive their generation, it is but intelligent that we should accept the truth of this declaration in good faith until we come to confirm it in our own personal experience. No doubt, an immature child can never understand the physical thrills of the nuptial chamber, and thereby it cannot be said that the newlyweds are always telling lies. The little child has not matured enough even to feel sympathetically the thrills explained. Similarly, we living in delusion cannot understand the thrills of the transcendental or experience its eternal nature, however vividly the teachers may explain, until we also grow to the required inner maturity. By this rediscovery of the self, Krishna promises that the Pandav prince will thereafter be able to recognize the entire creation constituted of the world of objects, emotions, and ideas as nothing other than the self, which is his own real nature, which again is nothing other than me, Lord Krishna the Paramatman, having for once realized the ocean. All the waves are recognized by the intelligent eye as nothing but the ocean. In this stanza, thus tests of having realized that knowledge discussed in the previous stanzas are given. It also indicates how long we must hold on to the apron of a true guru. As long as we have not realized that the whole creation is nothing but our own self, which is as divine and omnipotent as the Lord of Dwarka himself, so long we cannot afford to leave our infinite relationship and complete dependence upon the preceptor and guide the Guru. Moreover, see how excellent knowledge is. Verse number 36. अपि चेदसि पापेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यः पापकृत्तमः सर्वं ज्ञानप्लवेनैव वृजिनं सन्तरिष्यसि. Even if you are the most sinful of all sinners, yet you shall verily cross all sins by the raft of knowledge. While Arjuna was promised such a glorious transcendental experience, too divine for him to believe, he felt a certain amount of lack of confidence in himself, which was perhaps reflected on his face. He had a feeling that he was not fit for such a great inner experience. Such a feeling can come to any one of us because there is none among the intelligent who is not painfully conscious of his own shortcomings. Vedanta is not a philosophy that heartlessly keeps the sinners out of its halls of wisdom. It does not believe that there is any lost soul who will ever wander among the heathens and who can be redeemed only if he enters the portals of the church of Vedanta. Tolerant to a fault, Vedanta declares the truth and nothing but the truth. The all pervading divine manifests everywhere, and therefore there is no sinner who cannot, through his endeavor, come to claim his own heritage of absolute perfection. The Gita is a scripture of life written for man, and its universality is unmistakably seen in the statement here. It assures man that even if he be the most sinful among the sinful, he too can cross over his painful destinies of the present and reach the shores that lie beyond finitude and imperfections. Such a clear charter of man's right to the divine has never so far been written in any other existing scripture of the world. To rediscover that in reality the ego is nothing other than the self in us, and to live thereafter as the self of all is called true wisdom, jnana. Having thus awakened to our real nature, the dreamy cravings of the flesh can no more enchant us away from our pristine glory and make us run down the channels of sensuousness to wreck ourselves on the stony bed of sin and sorrow. This is indicated by a beautiful metaphor. By the raft of knowledge alone shall you go across all sins. In what manner does this wisdom destroy sin? Here is an example. Verse number 37. यथै धांसि समेद्धोऽग्निर्भस्मसात् कुरुतेऽर्जुन ज्ञानाग्निदग्धकर्माणि भस्मसात् कुरुते तथा. As the blazing fire reduces fuel to ashes, O Arjun, so does the fire of knowledge reduce all actions to ashes. Just as fire reduces fuel to ashes. This example has been given by the Lord in his sheer fatherly love for Arjun. These words, familiar to all yajnashalas, when used apart from their word meaning, are capable of creating in their association brilliant suggestions of a serene atmosphere and a thrilled sense of divinity. The sacred canopy under which the fire altar and devotees are all sheltered during the Vedic ritual yajna is called the yajnashala. Besides, the example is very striking. Whatever be the quality, shape, condition, color, etc. of the fuel pieces, when all of them are taken to the fireplace and digested by the fire, they become one homogeneous mass of ash. In the samples of ash left in the earth, we cannot recognize the ash of a particular twig as different from that of another. Similarly, all karmas, it is said, good, bad, or indifferent, get burnt up in the fire of knowledge and will become something altogether different from what they were in their cause and effect condition. Solid fuel having girth, weight, smell, etc., becomes almost weightless with no specific color except a light greenness when it comes to the final state of ash. Actions leave reactions. The reactions mature at different periods of time depending upon the quality and intensity of the actions. From beginningless time in our different manifestations, we have been at every moment acting in our egocentric vanity and individuality. All those actions must have left their residual impressions and they have to be lived through. This entire karma has been scientifically considered as falling under three classifications. They are called not yet operative sanchita, operative prarabdha, and to be operative in future agami. When in the Gita it is said that all karmas are burnt down, the Lord means the entire sanchita and agami. Wherefore, verse number 38, नहि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते तत्स्वयं योगसंसिद्धः कालेनात्मनि विन्दति. Certainly, there is no purifier in this world like knowledge. He who is himself perfected in yoga finds it in the self in time. So glorious is the result of self realization that Lord Krishna explores in enthusiasm and cries, verily, there exists nothing in this world more noble and sacred than self knowledge. Just as to drowning man, there is nothing more precious than a life belt, so too, to the deluded ego, there cannot be a greater possession and a nobler endeavor than the acquisition of knowledge of its own real nature. The knowledge of the self can be attained in one's own bosom when one has gained in oneself a full mastery in yoga. When one has sincerely and diligently practiced the above mentioned 12 yajnas and gained a complete self mastery through them. This mastery of the self over the flesh is not given by any teacher. The traditional story of a teacher spiritualizing a student by his touch is a myth. It is impossible. Had it been so, in the presence of such a perfect prophet like Krishna, Arjun could have attained, especially when the Lord felt such a great friendliness and love towards him. In a wink, all the spirituality needed to become a God man. Many devotees have from time to time wasted their chances and brought dishonor to their noble teachers because they expected their gurus to impart their acquired wisdom to them, their chelas, disciples, for the physical services rendered or the intellectual support given. Many of the existing seekers are today thoughtlessly squandering away their noble opportunities by vainly waiting for this cheap and ready method of purchasing Godhood. Let them be warned that in spite of such glorifications of some gurus available in the market and sold at some ashramas in this country, it has no scriptural support. Here, Krishna, in all love, plainly tells the truth to Arjun that he has to purify himself, Swayam, and then he himself will realize the truth in good time, Kalena. No definite time schedule is promised for perfection to manifest. It is only said that he who is practicing sincerely and devotedly all the 12 different subjective yajnas that are described earlier will attain the necessary growth within and will in good time come to experience the self, the beatitude of perfection, the state of Godhood. In good time, Kalena. This does not mean either immediately, nor does it promise us the Supreme only after trillions of impossible years. The same idea has been more beautifully described in the following stanza by a more self-explanatory term erlong, achirayana. It gives a direct suggestion of hope and guidance to all seekers of all times, that they need not become impatient. In fact, it would be far better for them constantly to apply themselves on the right path in the full confidence that they shall ere long reach their goal. The surest means of acquiring wisdom is declared as follows. Verse number 39. श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानं तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिमचिरेणाधिगच्छति. The man who is full of faith, who is devoted to all, and who has subdued the senses, obtains this knowledge, and having obtained knowledge, ere long he goes to the supreme peace. The qualities that are necessary for an individual to be assured of the knowledge divine are being enumerated here as vividly as from the leaf of a science textbook. Three great qualities have been indicated, and to understand them is to understand why the so called seekers, in spite of their claims to sincere self application, do not actually reach anywhere near the ladder of development. Faith, devotion, and self control are the three imperative necessities to be acquired ere we can hope to evolve into the diviner stature from our present mortal encumbrances. But these three words are more often misunderstood than rightly evaluated. Faith, Shraddha, exploiters of religions have been making capital out of repeating this word as their safest excuse for all spiritual problems to clear which devotees may approach these men who pose themselves as guides in religion. Invariably, we find that the ordinary devotees are completely rendered, sometimes fanatical and often poorer in their intellectual and mental growth because of the unintelligent insistence of Shraddha, translated as blind faith and unquestioned acceptance of any declaration said to be divine. Shankara tolls the death knell of this misunderstanding when he explains Shraddha as that by which an individual readily understands the exact import of the scriptural text as well as the pregnant words of advice of the preceptor. Devoted to it, tatparaha, whatever be the path of divine self development that he may be following, it is an unavoidable necessity that the seeker must give his undivided attention to it and must on all occasions maintain in his mind a continuous consciousness of the divine. A mere intellectual study of the scriptures will not help us in purifying and shaping our within to the glorious beauty of the divine. It is necessary that we must pour out our mind and intellect into the scheme of living that the Upanishads advise. Who has subdued the senses? The Shraddha and Jnana explained above will not sustain themselves, and no seeker can consistently hope to entertain them unless he is constantly striving his best to live in a spirit of self control. It is the sense organs that seduce us away into the life of excessive sensuousness, and when one has entered into the troubled waters of sensuous life, one has no chances of maintaining oneself quietly in the higher values of life. To walk the path divine is to get out of the gutters of sensuousness. Excessive sense life and absolute God life are antitheses to each other. Where the one is, the other cannot be. Where the light of inward serenity and deeper peace have come, the darkness created by sense, passions, and animal appetites must depart. It is imperative, therefore, that a seeker should learn to live in steady and constant sense control. Why should we live renouncing sense enjoyments and employing our mind and remembering constantly the divine goal of life with faith both in ourselves and the science of religion. Ordinarily, an intellect can inquire only as to the cause and effect of things. The ego is ever employed in its own motive hunting. A seeker in the initial stages of his self development remains constantly in his intellect. Naturally, he will inquire what the result of such a conspicuous sacrifice would be. To convince him, the second line is given that a seeker who lives the above mentioned triple program of divine life reaches the state of knowledge is the promise and guarantee of the rishis who are the authors of the immortal scriptures. A doubt again arises as to why we should, after all, acquire the knowledge divine. Krishna explains here that having gained the right knowledge, the individual soon reaches the supreme peace. The promise of reaching the great goal of life is got guaranteed to take effect in a definite period of time. Just as in the previous stanza it was said in good time, Kalena, so too here it is said ere long, Achirena. In short, after gaining this knowledge, one would soon reach the goal of life. Supreme peace, Param Shanti. The goal of life is labeled here as the supreme peace that knows no diminution. In these days of peace mongers getting ready for war in the name of peace, one is apt to become honestly skeptical about the goal indicated in this stanza. The term peace here is not that undefined vague concept that is often repeated in politics whenever it is convenient for a set of politicians to do so. But the term Shanti has a wealth of psychological suggestiveness. It is very well known that every living creature is at all moments trying to gain a better happiness through all its activities in life, from breathing and eating to the organized endeavor in capturing the world market through war and destruction. All activities are attempts by the frail individuals to discover a greater and a better joy or happiness. This is true not only in man but in the animal kingdom and even in the vegetable world. In short, no action is possible unless the actor is motivated by an inner urge in him to seek a greater sense of fulfillment or joy unto himself. If thus the whole world is striving to win the highest joy that is possibly can, and having gained it, to invest all energy and intelligence to retain the same, then the goal of life should be absolute happiness, where all strife ends, all desires are fulfilled, All thoughts and agitations are finally exhausted. Desires for joy give rise to thought disturbances, which, trying to fulfill themselves in the outer world, become the visible actions in everyday life. The restlessness of the mind and the very fatigue of the body shall both end when absolute joy is attained. Therefore, absolute joy is absolute peace. Here in this stanza, the goal of life is indicated as the supreme peace, which may be, in other words, explained in the as the supreme joy. Thou shalt not doubt this, for doubt is most sinful. How? Listen. Verse number 40. Adnyascha shraddhanascha samshayatma vinashyati nayam lokosti na paro na sukham samshayatmanaha. The ignorant, the faithless, the doubting self goes to destruction. There is neither this world nor the other, nor happiness for the doubter. In the previous verse, it was said that those who had faith and knowledge would soon reach the supreme peace. In order to hammer this very same truth in, Krishna is there emphasizing through a negative declaration that they who have not these qualities cultivated, gained, and developed in them will get themselves ultimately destroyed and completely ruined. He who has neither the knowledge of self, of the self, is, if not a spiritual realization, at least a clear intellectual understanding. Now, the intellectual readiness to grapple with and fully understand the true import of the scriptural declarations and the words of the Master's Shraddha, Krishna asserts, will certainly get ruined if he be also a doubting Thomas Sanshayatma. In the next line, Krishna, with all emphasis, condemns such men of endless doubts and points out their tragedy in life. The Lord says that such men who doubt the self will not find any joy or happiness anywhere, neither here nor in the hereafter. In explaining thus, the Gita seems to express that there may be a small chance, perhaps, for one who is devoid of knowledge and faith to discover some kind of a happiness in this world, here and there, but that those who are constant doubters can enjoy neither here nor there. Such men are psychologically incapable of enjoying any situation because the doubting tendency in them will poison all their experiences. He whose teeth have become septic must constantly poison the food that he is taking. So, too, those who have this tendency of doubting everything will never be able to accommodate themselves in any situation, however perfect and just it might be. The line contains a spot of satire, almost vitriolic in its pungency when it is directed towards the intelligent skeptic. Moreover, for this reason also, yoga sanyasta karmanam jnana sanchina samshayam atmavantam na karmani nibadnanti dhananjaya. Verse number 41. He who has renounced actions by yoga, whose doubts are rent asunder by knowledge, who is self possessed, actions do not bind him, O Dhananjaya. This being the penultimate verse in the chapter, it is a beautiful summary of all the main secrets of life explained in it at length in it. when through the practice of Karma Yoga we have learned to renounce our attachments to the fruits of action and yet to work on it on in perfect detachment when every doubt in us regarding the goal of life has been completely removed in our own inner experiences of the nobler and the diviner in us as a result of the above. 2. The ego comes to rediscover itself to be nothing other than the Atman. Then the individual ego comes to live poised in the self as the self. When such an individual works, his actions can never bind him. It is only egoistic activities motivated by our egocentric desires that leave gross impressions on our inner personality and thus painfully bind us to reap their reactions with a sense of detachment and in right knowledge as indicated in the above scheme. When an individual has destroyed his ego sense, his actions cannot bind him at all. As a dreamer, I might commit a murder in my dream upon my dream wife, but when I awake from my dream, I shall not be punished for the crime that I seem to have committed in my dream. For the dreamer has also ended along with the dream. The dreamer committed the murder and deserves punishment, but in the waker, the dreamer is absent. Similarly, the egocentric actions can bind the throttle, can bind and throttle only the ego. But when the ego has become Atma Vantaha, meaning poised in the self, just like the dreamer when he gets poised in the waker. The activities of the ego can no more bind the self. The ego poised in the self is the experience of the real self. The dreamer poised in the waker is the waker. This being the wondrous result and the supreme profit that true knowledge can give to the deluded. Krishna advises Arjuna. Verse number 42. Tasmadajnana sambhutam hृत्स्थं ज्ञानासिनात्मनः चित्वैनं संशयं योगम् तिष्ठ भारत. Therefore, with the sword of knowledge, cut asunder the knowledge of the doubt of the self, born of ignorance, residing in your heart, and take refuge in yoga. Arise, O Bharat. In this concluding stanza, the Lord's advice is precise and it is given with a loving insistence. The stanza rings with a spirit of paternal urgency felt by the Lord towards the Pandava prince. In the language of war, Krishna advises his warrior friend on the battlefield how best to live the life of dedication and perfection as advised by the Hindu rishis from the quiet and peaceful Himalayan valleys. With the sword of knowledge, Arjuna is encouraged to cut off the bonds of ignorance and cleave asunder this doubt of the self lying in the heart. The spiritual doubt is explained here as working from the heart. This may read rather strange to a modern man. Doubt must come from the intellect, it cannot come from the heart. It is the traditional belief in Vedanta that the intellect is seated in the heart, wherein the term heart does not mean the fleshy pumping instrument in the human bosom. The term heart is used here not in its physiological meaning, but in its literacy usage. When heart means the source of all love and sympathy, of all noble human emotions, an intellect functioning from and through an atmosphere of sympathetic love, kindly charity, and such other noble qualities alone can be considered in the science of philosophy as the human reason. Therefore, when the Upanishads talk of the doubts lying crystallized in the heart, the rishis mean the intellectual perversions in some of the seekers that make them incompetent to feel and appreciate the vision of the soul. These doubts can be completely annihilated only when the individual gains an intimate subjective experience of the self in him. This can be achieved only by yoga, not a strange mystical process secretly advised to a few by mysteriously rare groups of gurus, but to be practiced in the unknown dark caves of the Himalayas, living altogether a frightful life of unnatural privations. In the Gita, the word yoga has been forever tamed and domesticated to be with all of us, serving as faithfully at all times in our life. By the term yoga in this last stanza, Krishna means the 12 techniques which he has explained in the subjective yajnas. The chapter concludes with a spirited call to Arjun, arise, O Bharat. In the context of the Gita, though the word may be rightly said to mean only a call to Arjun, it is a call to every seeker, especially to this country as a whole, to get up and act well in the spirit of yajna, and thereby to gain more and more inner purity, so that through true meditation, every one of us can come to experience and gain the supreme peace, which is the final fulfillment of evolution. Thus, in the Upanishads of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, in the science of the eternal, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the fourth discourse ends entitled The Yoga of Renunciation and of Action in Knowledge. Om, 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 Om. Om तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे ज्ञानकर्मसन्न्यासयोगो नाम चतुर्थोऽध्यायः। हरि ओम। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम। श्री चिन्मय सद्गुरवे नमः। हरि ओम। श्री राम।